wealthy entrepreneur chose his lover over his wife, bringing her to a high-profile gala, never suspecting she was plotting something monumental. What she did next left the entire room speechless. The grand reception hall glowed under the soft shimmer of countless crystal chandeliers, each prism scattering light in delicate patterns that made the entire space feel almost dreamlike. The gentle hum of conversation, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the occasional burst of laughter filled the air with unmistakable luxury. Natalie Harrington stood near the ornately decorated bar, her fingers idly tracing the rim of her glass of white wine. Her sapphire blue silk gown draped over her slender frame with an effortless grace only she could embody. She had perfected the art of blending into crowds like these, watching, listening, absorbing every detail. But tonight, there was a subtle tension in the air, a shift she couldn't quite define. Then it happened. The murmurs started low, barely perceptible at first, a wave of hushed voices rolling from one side of the hall to the other, like a tide gathering force. Natalie's carefully composed expression held steady, but underneath, her heart raced. She turned her eyes toward where everyone else was looking, and there he was, Daniel Harrington, her husband, her entire world. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Bella Monroe, the young heiress known for stirring up tabloid gossip and draining bottles of Dom Perignon. Bella's crimson dress hugged every curve like it was painted on, a bold contrast to Natalie's classic sophistication. The flashes of paparazzi cameras trailed them as they entered, strobing the room with sharp bursts of white light. Daniel moved through the crowd with his signature easy confidence, that smug grin he always wore resting perfectly on his lips. He radiated an air of untouchable charm. Natalie felt the room sway for a split second, but she forced her feet to stay rooted to the gleaming marble floor. She had covered enough scandals in her days as a renowned journalist to know exactly what this was. A scandal unfolding live before her eyes. Only this time, she was the front-page story. The betrayal burned, but the deeper cut was the humiliation anchoring itself painfully in her chest, sharp, suffocating. Daniel hadn't just cheated on her, he'd choreographed it for maximum impact, ensuring everyone they knew saw him disgrace her. The same elite circle that once worshipped them as the ultimate power couple now whispered in disbelief. A passing server offered her a fresh glass of champagne, but Natalie declined with a small, stiff smile, a mask she had mastered long ago. She had mastered this mask after years of surviving the cutthroat world of elite society. The murmurs around her swelled louder now, and she knew she had only seconds to choose her next move. Daniel finally caught sight of her across the lavish hall, and for a heartbeat, something flickered across his face. Hesitation? Regret? No, satisfaction. He wanted her to break, to shatter under the eyes and whispers of everyone who mattered. Natalie lifted her chin and stepped forward, each movement deliberate. "Daniel," she called out smoothly, her voice slicing through the tension like a fine blade. Bella's painted lips curved into a smug smirk, her manicured hand clinging tighter to Daniel's arm. Natalie didn't even glance at her. Her eyes stayed locked on her husband's arrogant stare. He looked down at her with that same dismissive charm he used on everyone, as if this humiliating moment was nothing but a mild inconvenience he could fix with sweet lies. "Natalie," Daniel said, his tone dripping with mocking affection. "You look stunning tonight." Natalie's lips twitched in a smile that never reached her eyes. "And you look exactly as I expected." Her words slipped between his pride like a hidden blade. For a second, annoyance sparked behind Daniel's eyes, but he recovered almost instantly. "Come now, sweetheart," he murmured, voice low but loud enough for the curious onlookers close by. "Let's not make this dramatic." He really thought she'd crumble for him. He never understood her at all. She leaned in closer. Her voice dipped in velvet but edged with poison. "Oh, don't worry. I'd never cause a scene." She paused just long enough for her words to sting, then straightened up. "Enjoy your night, both of you." She didn't wait for either of them to reply. Turning on her heel, Natalie strode away, each step measured and graceful, making sure every eye in the room stayed on her until she vanished down the corridor. She felt the burn of their curiosity on her back, but she refused to falter. She wouldn't feed Daniel the satisfaction he craved. Once she was hidden from the glittering crowd, Natalie exhaled sharply and braced herself against a cold marble pillar in the shadowed hallway leading to the exit. The muffled laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the ballroom behind her, but it all seemed distant now, muted by the storm inside her chest. Back at their penthouse, the silence swallowed her whole. She flung her clutch onto the sleek granite counter and stepped to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the endless lights of downtown Chicago flickering like distant stars. But tonight, they offered no comfort. They only reflected back the hollow ache gnawing at her ribs. Her mind spiraled through every year they'd built together. Every glittering event, every whispered promise, every lie so carefully told that she'd believed him. The late nights waiting up alone. The excuses she'd forced herself to accept. The deceit she'd swallowed whole because she wanted so badly for it all to be true. She had taken in every lie, every excuse, and now it was all unraveling in the most humiliatingly public way possible. Her fists clenched at her sides. Daniel thought this was his final triumph, his clean escape. But Natalie Harrington was not a woman who surrendered easily. Years of chasing buried truths as an investigative journalist had taught her one thing. When used wisely, the truth was the deadliest weapon of all, and tonight, Daniel had handed her every piece she needed. With fresh resolve, she crossed the penthouse living room to her sleek glass desk, flipped open her laptop, and began to type. Her fingers struck the keys with laser focus, dragging from the corners of her memory every inconsistency, every secret deal, every hushed phone call she'd chosen to ignore in the name of love. Those days were over. Lines of text filled the screen, forming the outline of something far bigger than just an exposé of Daniel Harrington's infidelity. This was her counterstrike, a story built not on spite but on ironclad facts that would rip apart his carefully polished empire. He might have humiliated her tonight, but Natalie was setting up a reckoning so thorough that soon enough, Daniel wouldn't just regret betraying his wife, he'd regret ever underestimating her. The soft glow of her laptop screen cast her reflection onto the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her as she sat back, staring at the blinking cursor. Outside, Chicago's skyline glittered and pulsed with restless life, but inside these walls, a different storm raged, a storm she'd contained for too long. She leaned back in her chair and drew a deep breath, her thoughts drifting to how it all began. There was a time when she believed Daniel Harrington was the ending to her fairy tale. A driven, self-made entrepreneur whose relentless ambition seemed unstoppable. In the early days, Natalie fell for his unshakable confidence, his sweeping vision, the way he could make her feel like she was the center of his universe. Now, as she looked at his framed photo on the fireplace mantel, she saw only fractures, flaws that had always been there, ignored by a woman desperate to believe she'd found her forever. Natalie had never trusted perfection. As a journalist, she'd made her name ripping back velvet curtains to reveal the filth beneath society's gleaming facade. But when it came to her own marriage, she'd let her instincts rust. She had brushed off his late nights as the price of success. She'd dismissed his short temper as stress. She'd told herself that the cold distance between them was just a rough patch they'd push through. But deep down, she'd always known. It wasn't just the nights he returned smelling faintly of perfume that didn't belong to her, or the quick flashes of guilt in his eyes before his practiced smile reappeared. It was the way he gradually stopped. Looking at her like she was his equal had faded long ago. Instead, he'd started treating her like just another trophy, an accessory that completed the glossy illusion of their perfect power couple status. Natalie remembered their first gala as husband and wife, how she had stood proudly at Daniel's side, posing for the cameras while he whispered promises that made her heart skip. Back then, she clung to every word, believing them with all she had. But now, replaying those moments, she saw them clearly for what they were. Empty lines from a man who had always wanted power more than love. Her thoughts drifted to Bella Monroe. Bella was everything Natalie wasn't, young, reckless, and completely unashamed. Daniel had always thrived on admiration, craving the effortless flattery Bella handed him without hesitation. It stung more than Natalie wanted to admit. Underneath her hard shell, she felt the raw ache of every lie she'd swallowed. Every night she'd stayed awake waiting for Daniel to come home, convincing herself his late hours meant sacrifice. not betrayal. Now, seeing Bella flaunted so boldly, that ache hardened into something sharper: resolve. If he thought she would stand quietly by while he fed on her silence, he didn't know her at all. For months, Natalie had heard the whispers, snide comments at charity dinners, subtle jabs from people she once trusted. She'd pushed it all aside, telling herself that Daniel would never gamble with their reputation. She had been wrong. Tonight, watching him flaunt his betrayal so openly, Natalie felt a new, icy clarity settle in her chest. Daniel didn't fear consequences. He had built his business empire on calculated risks and merciless choices, and now he'd applied the same tactics to their marriage. He was certain she'd keep quiet, so that protect his public image, because that's what a wife in her position was expected to do. But Daniel had misjudged her completely. Natalie turned back to her laptop, fingers poised above the keys. For the past few months, she'd been investigating corruption scandals within Chicago's business elite, digging through layers of cover-ups and backroom deals, never realizing the biggest lie was buried inside her own home. Her chest tightened at the cruel irony. She could see through any mask except the one she woke up next to. During those late nights chasing leads, she had uncovered something strange buried deep inside Daniel's financial web. A string of off-the-record transactions, suspicious partnerships, investments that didn't quite line up. At first, she chalked it up to sloppy bookkeeping. But the deeper she traced the threads, the clearer it became. Daniel was hiding something massive, something far worse than a mistress. Natalie thought back to a conversation she'd had with Noah Carter, her longtime friend and trusted investigative partner, just a few weeks ago. Over cappuccinos in their favorite little coffee shop on West Superior Street, Noah had mentioned hearing rumors about questionable deals tied to Harrington Group. She'd waved it off back then, too busy holding on to the hope that Daniel's worst crime was infidelity and arrogance. But tonight, after watching him broadcast his betrayal for the entire city to see, Natalie couldn't ignore the truth anymore. What else had he been hiding? Natalie opened a folder labeled Harrington Holdings and skimmed the pages. Financial reports, offshore account records, fragments of a puzzle she had been too afraid to assemble until tonight. She scrolled down the list of shell companies until her eyes locked onto a name she knew all too well: Monroe Investments. Her breath caught in her chest. Bella wasn't just some reckless fling. She was woven deep into Daniel's business empire. Natalie's journalist instincts roared awake, adrenaline surging as the facts began to stitch themselves together. This wasn't just a scandalous affair. It was a carefully orchestrated move. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she cross-referenced dates, wire transfers, and corporate registries. The trail was faint but undeniable. Money flowing quietly into offshore accounts, luxury properties popping up in Bella's name, and suspicious deposits that lined up perfectly with some of Daniel's largest deals in the past year. A cold knot twisted in Natalie's stomach. This wasn't only betrayal. It was fraud, deceit, and corruption on a scale she hadn't dared to suspect. She pushed back from her chair and paced the spacious living room, anger smoldering beneath her ribs. But stronger than the rage was a blazing sense of purpose. She had dedicated her career to taking down men like Daniel, cocky, reckless men who believed their power made them untouchable. And now fate had dropped the biggest case of her life right into her own home. She snatched up her phone and hit speed dial. "Noah, I need your help," she said, her voice steady but crackling with resolve. "Natalie?" Noah's voice broke through the static, alarm clear in his tone. "I saw the pictures online. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said quickly, "but I need to dig deeper. This is bigger than cheating, Noah. Daniel is tangled up in something serious, and I have to know exactly what it is." There was silence on the other end, then a quiet exhale. "You're sure about this? If you pull that thread, you know it could blow up. Fast." Natalie's grip tightened around her phone. "I'm already in this, Noah. Now I need to finish it." When she hung up, the weight of it all pressed onto her shoulders. The marriage she had bled herself dry to protect was nothing but a polished lie. But she refused to stand there as the humiliated wife any longer. She would be the one to rip Daniel Harrington's perfect kingdom apart, piece by calculated piece. And when she was done, he wouldn't just lose her. He would lose everything. The morning after the gala, Natalie sat at the breakfast table in their polished penthouse, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee curling through the air. The soft hum of Chicago traffic below droned on like background static, a stark contrast to the chaos churning inside her. The images from last night replayed in sharp, punishing detail. Daniel's smug grin, Bella's possessive stare, the murmurs and camera flashes. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was a spectacle, a humiliation crafted for maximum exposure. Natalie raised her mug to her lips, taking a slow sip, her hands only barely trembling. She refused to break. Not yet. Across the room, Daniel stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, pristine in his tailored charcoal suit, acting as if nothing at all had unraveled. He turned his head toward her, his face unreadable. "You didn't sleep," he said lightly, breaking the silence. Natalie didn't look at him. "Neither did you," she replied, her voice calm and even. Daniel chuckled, stepping away from the glass and pouring himself coffee, his tone almost entertained. "I expected a bigger reaction," he said, watching her over the rim of his cup. "You caught me off guard, Nat." She lifted her eyes to meet his, her stare cold and unblinking. "You think you know me so well, don't you, Daniel?" A flicker, maybe doubt, crossed his face, but it vanished before she could be sure. "We've been married 8 years, he said smoothly. "I know exactly how you tick. You pick it apart, spin it into one of your stories in that head of yours, then you move on. That's how you process." Natalie set her cup down gently and leaned back in her chair, studying him like a stranger. Inside, her pulse hammered so hard it made her chest ache, but her face stayed marble smooth. She tasted bitter betrayal on her tongue with every measured breath, fighting back the primal urge to scream, to break the porcelain calm he thought she'd never shatter. "You're right about one thing," she said, her lips curving into a small, inscrutable smile. "I do analyze, but moving on? That's not in my plan this time." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temple as if she were being unreasonable. "Nat, don't turn this into something ugly. I know you're hurt, but things happen. We can get through it." Natalie felt the heat surge in her chest, but forced her tone to stay cool. She pressed her nails into her palm under the table, grounding herself. Anything to keep her rage from spilling out. "Things?" she echoed sharply. "Are we calling it things now? Affairs, public humiliation, lies, parading her around like I'm invisible?" Daniel let out a frustrated breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Come on, let's not pretend our marriage has been flawless. You've been more married to your work than to me, and honestly, you're not exactly the easiest person to love, Natalie." There it was, the pivot, the blame shift. Natalie's jaw tensed, but instead of shouting, she pushed her chair back and rose to her feet, her expression composed but her eyes burning with promise. "You're right, Daniel. I may not be easy to love," Natalie said calmly, her eyes fixed on his, "but at least I know the difference between love and power. You don't." His jaw tightened, but he stayed silent as she walked past him, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. He thought he'd won this round, that his charm and money would patch over the wreckage one more time. He was dead wrong. Later that afternoon, Natalie sat in her office at the Tribune, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she pulled up the files she'd been quietly gathering for weeks. Suspicion had been simmering in her mind long before last night, and now, driven by a clarity she hadn't felt in years, she began connecting every hidden piece. Daniel had always been obsessive about making his business bulletproof. Too obsessive. Each investment and acquisition buried under layers of shell corporations and legal smokescreens. But Natalie had noticed the cracks. Properties flipped through fake buyers, offshore accounts registered under aliases that all in the end pointed back to Daniel. And then there was Bella. Natalie leaned back in her chair, glaring at her screen. Bella Monroe wasn't just the side affair. She was a pawn perfectly positioned to mask money trails. The bank statements, the sudden leap in her assets, the cars she could never have afforded alone, it all spelled out something much bigger than a cheap affair. Daniel was funneling money through Bella, hiding something Natalie hadn't yet uncovered. A soft knock snapped her out of her thoughts. Noah Carter stepped inside, his expression dark with concern. "Got your message," he said, closing the door behind him. "What's going on, Nat?" Natalie let out a slow breath, waving him closer. "Daniel," she said flatly, spinning her screen toward him. "I think he's laundering money through Harrington Group. using Bella as the cover. Noah's brows shot up as he flipped through the files, shaking his head in disbelief. Jesus, Nat. If this holds up, it could ruin him. Are you absolutely sure? She nodded, her jaw locked tight. I wouldn't have called you if I wasn't. But it's not enough. I need hard evidence. Ironclad. Noah studied her for a long beat, then leaned forward. Look, I know you want to burn him to the ground. And you're right, he deserves it. But this is dangerous. If Daniel figures out you're tearing into his books, he won't play nice. Natalie held his stare, her voice unwavering. It's already ugly, Noah. I'm not backing off until I have every piece I need to bury him. Noah sighed, resigned. All right, I'll call in a few favors, see what I can dig up on his offshore stuff. But Nat. He paused, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. Be careful. You know exactly what kind of man he is. Natalie nodded slowly, feeling the truth of that settle in her chest like a stone. She did know. Daniel wasn't just a successful CEO. He was a strategist, a man who thrived on playing the long game and eliminating threats without a hint of remorse. But this time, Natalie was ready for him. That evening, she returned home to find Daniel lounging in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, gazing out over Chicago's glittering skyline. He turned as soon as she stepped inside, his eyes narrowing slightly, tracking her every move. You're quiet tonight? He said, swirling the amber liquid lazily. Planning something? Natalie gave him a faint smile. Just reflecting, Daniel. You've given me a lot to think about. Daniel chuckled, sinking deeper into the couch cushions. Well, I hope you're not planning to spin this into one of your dramatic exposés. That would be unfortunate. She met his gaze dead on, and for the first time she saw it. Fear. Subtle, buried under layers of his practiced arrogance, but there. A shadow of doubt flickered behind his eyes as she stepped closer, standing just above him. And for a fleeting second, she almost tasted pity. Almost. But the bitter memory of Bella's smug grin at the gala burned hotter than any lingering softness. Whatever love she'd once clung to was now ashes under her resolve. Oh, don't worry, she said softly, her voice laced with a calm threat. When I write something, it's always the truth. Daniel's eyes hardened, a trace of unease tightening his jaw. Natalie, he warned, his voice lower now. You know exactly how this works. I wouldn't push me if I were you. Natalie's smile didn't reach her eyes. Then maybe you shouldn't have made a spectacle out of humiliating me, Daniel, because you've just started a war. She turned away without another word, leaving him alone on the couch, the echo of her promise thick in the silence around him. In that moment, Natalie knew there was no turning back. The cracks in their marriage had been splintering for years, but now they would break wide open. Natalie sat at her desk, the soft glow of her laptop washing her face in pale light. She scrolled through page after page of transaction records, offshore account statements, and confidential contracts. Every file a testament to the tangled fortress of lies Daniel Harrington had built. She had spent her career dismantling the secrets of Chicago's elite. But this time, it wasn't just another headline. This time, it was her own betrayal, written in numbers and forged signatures. And for a breath, it made her stomach twist with an old fading ache for the man she once thought he was. But she forced herself to swallow that softness down, feeding the fire instead. This time, it was personal. A gentle knock on her office door made her glance up. Noah stepped inside, his face tight with worry. In one hand, he carried a thick manila folder. In the other, a fresh cup of coffee. He set both on her desk and leaned over her shoulder, scanning the spreadsheets on her screen. This is bigger than I thought, he said quietly, flipping through the folder. Daniel's not just hiding money, he's laundering it through a maze of shell companies. Bella's just the cover. He paused, voice dropping even lower. Nat, he's in bed with some serious people, dangerous people. Natalie closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath before answering. I suspected, she murmured, fingers tightening around the folder as she flipped through the damning reports. Bella's connection isn't just personal, Natalie said, her finger tapping the scanned document on her screen. She's signing off on deals, attending meetings on Daniel's orders. Look at this. Properties registered under her name, but the funds come straight from Harrington Group's offshore accounts. Noah sat opposite her, rubbing his temples as he absorbed the evidence. You do understand what blowing this up could mean, right? This isn't just about him cheating on you anymore, Nat. We're talking fraud, tax evasion, hell, maybe even money laundering. Natalie's lips tightened into a razor-thin line. Good, she said, her voice cutting and cold. He didn't just humiliate me, Noah. He turned me into a joke. But this is how I take back control. Noah let out a slow sigh, clearly torn. I get it, Nat, I do. But the man you're about to take down, he's not the same guy you married 8 years ago. Daniel will fight dirty. He'll unleash everything he has on you. Natalie's eyes hardened, her resolve radiating through every word. Underneath the steel, a faint pulse of fear trembled at the edges of her certainty. She'd be lying if she claimed it didn't terrify her. But the humiliation burned hotter than any fear could freeze her. She was done being cornered. Let him. I'm not scared of him anymore. Noah studied her face for a long second before nodding, resigned. All right. What's the next step? Natalie rose from her chair and walked to the large window, arms folded tightly as she stared out at the Chicago skyline, lights blinking against the dusk. She let her eyes blur for a moment, picturing the empire she was about to tear apart, knowing he'd try to shred her first. And she still didn't flinch. I need to build this case methodically, piece by piece. If I dump everything at once, he'll bury it in court with his army of lawyers. No, I need to leak just enough to stir the press, to plant doubt, make him panic. Noah smirked faintly. Classic Natalie Harrington, always 3 moves ahead. She turned back to him with a small, knowing smile. And I'm counting on Daniel to think I'm playing checkers when I'm playing chess. That evening, Natalie sat across from Daniel in their penthouse dining room. The air between them was so tense it nearly choked her. He glanced up from his perfectly arranged dinner plate, his tone feigning ease. You've been busy today, he remarked casually, lifting his glass of wine to his lips. Natalie met his gaze coolly, her face an unreadable mask. Work keeps me busy. You'd know all about that, wouldn't you? There was an edge in her words that made Daniel's smile twitch. He set his glass down with an audible clink. Come on, Nat. Let's not act like we don't understand each other. We know exactly how this works. She tilted her head, studying him as though seeing him for the first time. Do we? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I'm just now discovering who you really are. His smug grin wavered, a tiny crack, but he smoothed it over instantly. You always love digging for dirt, he said, voice silky smooth. It's in your nature, but some secrets should stay buried, darling. Natalie leaned forward slightly, her tone deceptively sweet. And some secrets have a way of clawing their way back up, no matter how deep you hide them. Daniel's eyes flickered, and for the first time, Natalie saw it, uncertainty. She was inside his head now, and she knew it. Over the next few days, Natalie played her hand exactly as she'd promised, one calculated move at a time. She arranged discreet leaks through a few trusted reporters she knew would jump at the chance to dig deeper. Small hints, whispers about shady offshore accounts, a suspicious land deal under Daniel's name, just enough to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of the public and, more importantly, his investors. Natalie watched with cold satisfaction as the financial news cycle lit up with speculation. Daniel's phone buzzed relentlessly during dinner, and each time he answered, his shoulders tensed a little more. One evening, after slamming his phone onto the marble countertop so hard it rattled a glass, Daniel looked up to find Natalie calmly reading on the couch. She lifted her eyes, feigning mild curiosity. Problems at work? She asked sweetly. Daniel shot her a look sharp enough to cut through steel. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? His tone dripped with suspicion. Natalie gave a casual shrug and a pleasant smile. Why would I? Your business dealings never interested me, until now. Daniel glared at her, jaw clenching so tight a muscle ticked in his temple. You're playing a dangerous game, Natalie. She set her book down and met his stare without blinking. No, Daniel, you started this game. I'm just making sure I finish it. A few days later, Natalie sat across from Noah in a tucked-away cafe downtown, the soft hum of other diners muffling their conversation. Noah slid a small USB drive across the table toward her. Everything you asked for, his offshore accounts, hidden assets, shell corporations, it's all here. Natalie picked up the drive, rolling it between her fingers. This is enough to bury him? Noah nodded, his expression grim. If you leak this, Harrington Group will implode. No second chance, no bailout. He'll lose it all. Natalie swallowed, feeling the hard truth settle like a stone in her chest. Years of secrets, betrayal, and manipulation, right here in the palm of her hand. She could obliterate him, strip away everything he prized more than her. But somewhere deep inside, a flicker of doubt sparked. Did she really want him ruined, or did she just want him to feel every ounce of what he'd made her feel? Noah watched her, softening his eyes. You okay? Natalie slipped the drive into her purse, managing a thin smile. I will be. That night, Natalie stepped into the penthouse to find Daniel waiting for her in the dim glow of the living room. He looked up slowly, his face unreadable. You've been busy, he said flatly. Natalie matched his stare, unflinching. So have you. Daniel stood, moving closer with deliberate calm, eyes darkening with something between warning and pleading. We don't have to do this, Nat. You could just walk away. We both could. Natalie felt her pulse thrum in her throat, but forced her voice to stay steady. And let you win? She shook her head slowly. No, Daniel, that's not how this ends. Daniel studied her for a tense heartbeat before stepping so close she could feel the heat of him. His voice dropped to a threat. Then you should remember, I don't lose. Natalie's lips curved into a cold, fearless smile, a spark of power in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years. Neither do I. She brushed past him, feeling his eyes burn into her back, and for the first time in a very long time, she knew exactly who held the upper hand. Daniel Harrington had built his empire on lies and manipulation. Natalie Harrington was about to dismantle it, brick by brick. The city skyline sprawled endlessly before Natalie as she stood at the penthouse window, her faint reflection merging with the glitter of downtown Chicago behind the glass. The hum of the city at night drifted up like a distant heartbeat, the lights below flickering like stars in a concrete galaxy. But Natalie wasn't here to admire the view. Her mind was a war zone, battling the burden of the evidence she'd pieced together and the quiet, furious storm churning in her chest. Daniel had been meticulous for years, but not meticulous enough. Every suspicious transfer, every shady offshore account, every hidden deal had left breadcrumbs. Now she had them all. The power was hers. Yet underneath that certainty, something twisted uncomfortably inside her, knowing that what she was about to unleash would obliterate the last ruins of their life together. Their marriage was already a cold battlefield of glances and half-veiled threats. But this was the final strike. For a fleeting moment, her eyes softened as her reflection flickered beside Daniel's in the glass, two silhouettes that once dreamed the same dreams. She forced herself to blink the memory away, to bury that flicker of longing beneath the iron resolve pressing into her ribs like armor. Behind her, the faint echo of footsteps crossed the penthouse until Daniel's reflection appeared in the glass. He stood there, watching her, his trademark smirk tugging at his lips, but tonight his eyes gave him away. Beneath that practiced arrogance was something else, caution, maybe even fear. You've been awfully quiet these days, Daniel said, swirling the amber whiskey in his glass. Should I be worried? Natalie turned slowly, offering him a small, careful smile. Should you? He let out a short laugh, but it lacked its usual bite. Come on, Nat. We're both too sharp for this cat-and-mouse routine. He took a sip, his eyes pinned to hers. If you're planning something, just say it. Natalie stepped closer, her heels clicking gently on the marble floor. What if I told you I already did? Daniel's jaw twitched, just barely, but she caught it. He set his glass down with a sharp clink, his gaze narrowing to slits. I see. And what exactly have you done? Natalie folded her arms, leaning slightly against the window, letting the city lights glow behind her. I've been asking myself the same thing, Daniel. What have you done? Offshore accounts, fake shell companies, money washed through Bella Monroe's name. Her voice stayed calm, but every word hit its mark with surgical precision. Daniel didn't move, but she could see it. The gears whirring in his head, calculating his next countermove, like he always did when he knew he was cornered. Finally, Daniel exhaled through his nose, leaning back against the bar in a poor imitation of calm. You know, Nat, he said smoothly, you really should have been a lawyer. You're so good at throwing around accusations without any proof. Natalie's smile was ice-cold as she slipped her phone from her pocket, tapped the screen once and held it up for him to see. Oh, I have proof, she said evenly. Want to see it? Or should I just forward it to my editor at the Tribune? For the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel's mask cracked. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by something far sweeter, fear. You wouldn't, he said, but the certainty in his voice was gone. Natalie tilted her head, savoring the shift in power. Wouldn't I? You, of all people, should know by now. I don't bluff. The silence between them thickened until it felt like breathing smoke. Daniel glared at her, his jaw so tight she could see a vein pulse at his temple. What do you want? He finally ground out, his tone low and controlled. Natalie stepped in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut sharper than any shout. I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything, to feel powerless, helpless. She studied him without a flicker of mercy. And I want to watch it happen. Daniel's eyes flickered with something dark and panicked. Realization, maybe, that Natalie wasn't the naive wife he could charm back with hollow promises and extravagant gifts. But Daniel Harrington wasn't the kind of man to go down quietly. You think you're clever, he murmured, a dangerous edge coiling around each word. But you're playing with fire, Natalie. She didn't flinch. Instead, her smile widened just a fraction. Then I'll have to be careful not to get burned. The days that followed were a masterclass in subtle warfare. Natalie moved carefully, leaving Daniel just enough rope to believe he still held the reins. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, she pulled every string she'd been patiently untangling for weeks. Anonymous leaks to the media, discreet phone calls, carefully dropped hints at the right charity gala or board meeting. Rumors bloomed like poison vines through Harrington Group's once bulletproof reputation. Investors whispered behind closed doors. Emergency meetings multiplied. Daniel's flawless composure began to fray at the edges, and Natalie watched each crack appear with quiet, ruthless satisfaction. One evening, her phone buzzed with a call from Noah. It's working, he said, barely hiding his excitement. The rumors are out of control. Some of his board members are starting to question his grip on the company. Natalie allowed herself the smallest, sharpest smile. Good. But we're not done yet. There was a pause, then Noah's voice softened. Nat, I have to ask. Are you absolutely sure? Once this explodes, there's no putting it back. Natalie turned to the wall of glass, Chicago's skyline twinkling back at her like a promise. Her voice was calm, resolute. I've never been more sure of anything. At home, Daniel's patience was running dangerously thin. He watched Natalie with a careful, guarded suspicion, as if waiting for her to slip up and expose how much she truly knew. But Natalie didn't falter. She played her role to perfection. Polite conversation over breakfast, calm small talk at dinner. But every so often, she caught him studying her across the table, eyes sharp and calculating, wondering just how deep her knowledge ran. The truth was, she knew everything. Late one evening, Natalie sat on the balcony, a glass of red wine balanced lightly in her hand as the Chicago breeze tugged at her hair. Daniel stepped out behind her, his shadow stretching across the balcony tiles. Nat, he said after a long silence, his voice quieter than she'd heard in weeks. Why are you doing this? She didn't turn to him. She let the night air wash over her, swirling her wine slowly. Because you left me no choice, Daniel. He exhaled a rough breath, dragging a hand through his hair. You could have just walked away. Natalie finally turned to look at him, her eyes hard and unyielding. And let you skate away with everything? No, I won't make this easy for you. Daniel held her stare, something flickering behind his eyes, something that almost looked like regret. But Natalie knew better. Men like Daniel didn't regret what they did, only that they'd been caught. For a split second, her resolve threatened to crack, an echo of every soft word and stolen kiss that used to live between them. But she clutched her wineglass tighter, nails digging into her palm, and drowned the memory in the bitter swirl of Cabernet. You should be careful, he murmured, his tones soft but barbed with unspoken threats. There are things you don't understand. Natalie's gaze didn't waver. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you brought your mistress to our anniversary gala. Daniel let out a low, humorless smirk, but it fell flat. You've always been a fighter, Nat. But don't forget, fights have consequences. She leaned in just enough for her voice to cut through the night like a knife. So do betrayals. Without another word, Natalie brushed past him, leaving him alone on the balcony, standing in the dark. He had no idea how far she was willing to go. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The newsroom at the Tribune buzzed with its usual chaotic rhythm. Phones ringing off the hook, reporters hunched over cluttered desks, the distant grind of printers spitting out column drafts. Natalie sat at her desk, fingers hovering above her keyboard, staring at the final headline that could bring Daniel Harrington crashing down. Inside Harrington Group. A web of corruption and betrayal. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she lingered over the send button. Weeks, no years of swallowed rage, humiliation, and betrayal were distilled into this moment. Once she hit send, there would be no undoing it. Daniel would face the fallout, his carefully guarded empire would splinter, and the world would finally see him for the fraud he was. Her hand trembled once, but she gritted her teeth and stilled it, forcing herself to remember every cruel word, every lie, every public humiliation, fueling her courage with her own scars. Noah appeared at her desk, leaning against its edge, worry tightening the lines around his eyes. "Nat," he said in a low voice, "you're really sure about this? Once it's out there, it's war." Natalie looked up at him, her eyes burning with steady resolve. "It already is." Noah sighed, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck. "Look, I know Daniel put you through hell," Noah said quietly, his voice low and serious. "But this won't just hit him. You know how scandals work. Once they dig into him, they'll dig into you too." Natalie's lips curved into a sharp, bitter smile. "Let them. I have nothing to hide." Noah paused, then gave her a resigned nod. "All right, but once this goes live, Harrington Group won't go down without a fight, and neither will Daniel." Natalie turned her eyes back to the glowing screen in front of her. Her finger hovered over the send button, trembling just once. A single breath of doubt caught in her throat, but she swallowed it like poison. "Let him." And with that, she pressed send. The reaction was immediate. Within an hour, the exposé ignited like dry brush in a wildfire. Major financial outlets picked it up within minutes. Social media exploded with theories and outrage. Harrington Group's stock price nosedived so fast that panicked investors flooded Daniel's team with calls. Reporters swarmed the company's downtown headquarters, cameras rolling. Journalists staked out the entrance to their penthouse, shouting questions at anyone who went in or out. Natalie watched it all from her desk at the Tribune, her phone vibrating nonstop with calls and messages. She ignored them. Instead, she opened her overflowing inbox. Tips from anonymous sources poured in by the minute, each offering a new piece of Daniel's buried secrets. For the first time since that wretched gala, her chest felt light, tight with adrenaline, but light. Beneath her calm, her pulse danced wildly, fed by a heady mix of relief and vengeance. She inhaled deeply, smoothed her blouse, and stood up. It had begun. Back at the penthouse, Daniel stormed through the door like a hurricane. His face was flushed with rage, his jaw clenched so hard a vein bulged at his neck. Natalie was waiting for him on the couch, a glass of wine balanced in her hand, utterly calm. "You think this is funny?" he spat, flinging a printed copy of her article onto the coffee table. The pages fanned out, the bold headlines screaming back at him. "Inside Harrington Group, a web of corruption and betrayal." Natalie took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, savoring every heartbeat of silence before she answered. "Not funny, Daniel," she said, setting her glass down with care. "Necessary." Daniel's hands balled into fists at his sides as he paced, a trapped animal prowling for an escape. "Do you even understand what you've done? You've destroyed everything I built." Her eyes never wavered. "I exposed the truth. There's a difference." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that cracked in his throat. "You think you're some righteous hero in this? Look at you. You're just as ruthless as the monsters you write about." Natalie tilted her head, unfazed. "Maybe, but at least I don't lie about it." Daniel dragged a hand through his hair, his fury slipping closer to panic. "They're freezing my accounts, Natalie. Clients are walking away. My lawyers won't stop calling." Natalie leaned back into the couch, crossed her legs, and gave him a look so cold it burned. "Good. Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to have everything you worked for ripped away in an instant." Daniel glared at her, chest heaving, his perfect world collapsing around him. "You wanted revenge. Congratulations. You got it." Daniel's voice was raw with bitterness. Natalie's expression hardened. "This wasn't revenge, Daniel. It was justice." He fell silent, staring at her as if truly seeing her for the first time. After a long pause, he muttered, "What are you going to do now? Burn it all down?" Natalie stood up, smoothing the front of her blouse with calm precision. Inside, her chest thundered with the wild mix of grief and triumph that justice always demanded. But her hands moved with unshakable steadiness. "I don't have to. You're doing that all by yourself." Daniel watched her walk past him, the crushing realization sinking in. She had beaten him at his own game. As the days passed, Natalie's exposé kept tearing through the walls of Harrington Group. Other women stepped forward with their stories. Former employees leaked incriminating emails. Federal investigators launched probes into his offshore accounts and fraudulent contracts. The man who once seemed untouchable was reduced to a cautionary headline, a symbol of greed, betrayal, and public downfall. But Natalie wasn't finished. One evening, she sat beneath the harsh studio lights of a nationally televised interview, calm and composed as the camera's red light blinked to life. "Why did you do it?" the anchor asked. "Why expose your own husband?" Natalie inhaled deeply, her hands resting steady on the armrests. "Because the truth matters. Because people like Daniel Harrington thrive on power and lies, and we've let them get away with it for too long." The anchor nodded solemnly. "Do you regret it?" A small, thoughtful smile touched Natalie's lips. "No. I only regret not doing it sooner." The interview aired that night, and within hours, Natalie Harrington became a symbol, admired by many, scorned by some, but respected by all. Daniel, meanwhile, was unraveling behind closed doors. Late one night, Natalie found him in the darkened penthouse living room. He sat slouched on the couch, a glass of whiskey hanging limply in his hand. His once flawless suit was wrinkled, his hair out of place. The man who had once radiated control and arrogance looked lost. "You got what you wanted," he rasped, voice hoarse and defeated. "Are you happy now?" Natalie watched him for a long moment, her face soft but unyielding. She almost pitied him, almost, but she reminded herself of every sleepless night, every cruel lie. Pity was wasted on men like him. "I didn't do this to be happy, Daniel," she said quietly. "I did it to be free." He let out a bitter breath, dragging a hand through his hair. "And now what? You get to walk away while I pick up the pieces?" She stepped closer, her voice low but cutting. "I warned you. You should have never underestimated me." Daniel looked up at her, and for the first time she saw it in his eyes. Defeat. Regret. Maybe even a flicker of something like respect. But it didn't matter anymore. It was far too late. With one last look, Natalie turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the ruin he'd built for himself. The scandal would keep unfolding. The headlines would keep rolling in. But for Natalie, it was finished. She had taken back her life, piece by piece, and as she stepped into the crisp Chicago night, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Free. Relief. Daniel Harrington had thought he could humiliate her in public and walk away unscathed. He was wrong. And Natalie Harrington was just getting started. She stood at the newsroom window, staring out at the city she'd once loved, now seeing it through an entirely different lens. Below, Chicago carried on, blissfully unaware of the storm she had unleashed. Daniel Harrington's empire, once bulletproof, was collapsing in real time, and Natalie had a front-row seat to every crack and fracture. The fallout came swift and merciless. Her exposé had triggered a cascade of federal investigations. Harrington Group was under intense scrutiny from regulators. Furious shareholders demanded answers. Financial shows picked apart Daniel's downfall with cool detachment, but Natalie could see it in their eyes. The thin veil of professional neutrality barely covered their schadenfreude. After all, nothing thrilled the public more than watching the mighty crash to earth. Her phone buzzed on the desk behind her, shattering the silence. It was Noah again. "Still hiding out, Harrington?" His voice came through, half teasing, half worried. "I'm not hiding," Natalie replied, her tone steady. "I'm observing." Noah let out a breath. "Daniel's calling in every chip he's got. He's fighting this with everything. His lawyers are spinning the narrative, making you look like the vengeful ex milking this for attention." Natalie smirked faintly at the glass. "Let them try. The facts are all in my corner." "Facts don't always win over perception," Noah warned. "Some outlets are already running hit pieces questioning your motives." Natalie crossed her arms over her chest, exhaling slowly. "Let them dig. They'll find exactly what I want them to find." Noah let out a low chuckle. God, you really are something else, Nat. That's why you keep me around, she quipped, though her voice carried no warmth. Sending you everything now, Noah said. I want you ready for whatever his next move is. Already am, Natalie said calmly before the line went dead. She lowered herself into her chair, eyes scanning the relentless stream of reports flooding her inbox. Every financial misstep, every hidden backdoor deal. She dragged it all into the light, but she knew Daniel wouldn't go quietly. Control had always been his drug, and she'd stripped it from him, piece by calculated piece. Now it wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. Across town at Harrington Group's gleaming headquarters, Daniel sat in his corner office, once a fortress of power, now a suffocating cell. His high-powered legal team crowded around him, their voices a low, urgent hum of damage control strategies and desperate legal maneuvers. We need to strike back, Daniel, one lawyer pressed, exasperated. The bleeding won't stop. Clients are bailing. Investors are panicking. If we don't flip the narrative, you're finished. Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming rhythmically against the polished mahogany. The game had changed, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he knew how to win it. He wasn't used to playing defense, and he despised it. His entire reputation had been built on power, precision, and ruthless control. And now Natalie had shattered it all with a single story. Daniel's mind raced through possible countermoves. He could spin it, twist public perception, cast himself as the victim of a bitter, vengeful ex-wife. The media loved a redemption arc, but deep down, he knew Natalie too well. She wasn't done, not even close. Find something on her, Daniel snapped suddenly, his voice slicing through the tense silence. Anything. I want dirt, old mistakes, secrets, something we can use to discredit her. His chief advisor, Mark, shot a wary look at the other men around the table. We've already started digging, Daniel, but Natalie Harrington's record is spotless. Her career is clean. There's nothing that sticks. Daniel's jaw flexed. Everyone has skeletons, Mark. Dig deeper. Find hers. But as he barked the order, a cold trickle of fear slid down his spine. An unfamiliar weakness he despised more than defeat itself. Natalie was the one opponent he couldn't corner, and deep inside, he knew it. But even as he spoke, a dark truth gnawed at him. Natalie was too careful. If she'd declared this war, she'd already accounted for every counterattack he could muster. Meanwhile, Natalie was beginning to feel the ripple effect of her exposé in her own life. Calls from mutual acquaintances went unanswered. Invitations to exclusive fundraisers and charity galas vanished overnight. The polite walls of high society closed in around her like glass barriers. But Natalie didn't care. One afternoon, seeking air to quiet her thoughts, she strolled through Millennium Park, the summer wind tugging at her hair. She barely registered the footsteps behind her until a familiar voice called her name. Natalie? She turned sharply to see Bella Monroe standing a few paces away, looking nothing like the glamorous mistress she'd been at the gala. The designer dresses, the shimmering confidence, gone. In their place was a woman with weary eyes and an undercurrent of desperation. I figured you'd come find me eventually, Natalie said coolly. Bella shifted her weight, visibly uncomfortable. You don't understand what you've started, Daniel. He's dangerous, and now that you've exposed him, he's going to come after you. Natalie's lips curved into a smile, hard and humorless. Let him. He's done enough damage. It's about time he learned what it feels like. Bella hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if someone might be watching. You think you're safe because you went public? You don't even know the half of it. He has connections, people who don't care about rules or headlines. Natalie's smile faded slightly. There was something raw in Bella's voice, something too real to dismiss. A needle of dread threaded through her ribs, quick and unwelcome. But she crushed it down, burying it under the cold certainty that fear was a luxury she no longer had. You made your bed, Bella, Natalie said sharply. Enjoy lying in it. Bella's eyes darkened, her exhaustion hardening into resentment. I hope you know what you're doing, Natalie, because Daniel won't stop until he's buried you. Natalie watched silently as Bella turned on her heel and disappeared down the sidewalk, her footsteps fading into the noise of the city. She let out a long breath, her grip tightening around her phone until her knuckles whitened. She knew Daniel wouldn't go down without a fight, and she was ready for it. The next morning, Natalie found herself standing on the courthouse steps, engulfed by a sea of reporters. Camera flashes strobed in her eyes, microphones thrust toward her face. Voices rose in a chorus of questions. Natalie, is it true Daniel is countersuing for defamation? Do you regret exposing your husband? How do you respond to claims that this was just personal revenge? Natalie lifted her chin, her face unreadable but resolute. She'd planned for this moment. She was unshakable. Inside, her pulse was a steady drumbeat under her skin, reminding her that fear and bravery could live side by side. I'm here today because the truth matters, she said, her voice steady and clear over the chaos. Daniel Harrington built his fortune on lies and manipulation. If standing here means holding him accountable, then no, I have no regrets. As she turned toward the courthouse doors, she caught sight of Daniel through the swarm. He stood at the entrance, surrounded by lawyers, that familiar smirk ghosting over his lips. Only now, it lacked its old certainty. He looked at her, trying to project power. This was far from over. But Natalie wasn't the same woman she had been when this war began. And she was more than ready to finish it. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with hushed tension. Every seat was filled, journalists scribbling notes, eyes flicking between the estranged power couple at the heart of the spectacle. Natalie sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture calm but iron-solid. Across from her, Daniel reclined in his chair. His once perfect composure was fractured. His shoulders slumped, his tie slightly askew. His legal team murmured urgently beside him, passing papers back and forth in a frantic shuffle. But Natalie saw it. The splinters in his armor. This wasn't another boardroom battle for Daniel. This was survival. The judge cleared her throat, and the low hum in the room cut out like a snipped wire. Natalie sat taller, feeling the moment settle onto her shoulders like a mantle she was born to wear. She had dedicated her life to fighting for the truth, for everyone else. This time it was her name, her scars, her freedom at stake, and the steady flame in her chest dared anyone to try and take it from her. This time she was fighting for herself. A few days earlier, she had sat in her new apartment, the modest place she'd moved into after walking away from the penthouse that had once been her gilded prison. It was smaller, quieter, but every box stacked in the corner felt like a piece of a life she was building on her own terms. Noah sat across from her, watching as she spread a mountain of legal paperwork over the coffee table. "You don't have to do this, Nat," he said quietly, his voice softer than usual. "You've already exposed him. The world knows what he is." Natalie glanced up at him, her eyes holding something deeper than rage, something fierce, unmovable. "This isn't just about exposing him, Noah," Natalie said quietly, her fingers resting on a stack of legal briefs. "It's about accountability. He needs to face real consequences, not just lose a few lucrative deals." Noah leaned back, rubbing his jaw, eyes narrowing a little. "You know you're playing a dangerous game, right?" Natalie allowed herself a faint smile. "I'm done playing, Noah. Now, I'm winning." Back in the courtroom, Daniel's lead attorney rose for closing arguments. He spun his narrative masterfully, shaping Natalie into the bitter ex-wife, scorned, emotional, vindictive. He pointed at her carefully crafted exposé and implied it was nothing more than a public tantrum dressed up as journalism. Natalie listened, her pulse steady. She'd known exactly what they'd throw at her. She was ready. When her turn came, she stood and walked slowly to the front of the courtroom. She met each juror's eyes, one by one, her calm unwavering. "For years, Daniel Harrington presented himself as a man of integrity," she began, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. "A man of power, influence, and trust. I believed it. Many of us did. But underneath it all was a different truth, a truth of manipulation, fraud, and deception." She turned slightly, locking eyes with Daniel. His expression was carefully neutral, but she knew the cracks were there. She could feel them. "This isn't about revenge," Natalie continued. "This is about the truth, the same truth I have dedicated my career to uncovering. Daniel didn't just betray me, he betrayed every investor, every employee, every person who believed in him and in Harrington Group." She paused. The room seemed to hold its breath. "I exposed him because the world deserves the truth, no matter how inconvenient it is for men like Daniel Harrington." Natalie inhaled slowly, then faced the judge. "Your Honor, I ask this court to hold him accountable, not just for me, but for everyone he deceived. She stepped back and sat down. Beneath the table, Noah's hand found hers, giving it a firm, quiet squeeze. She didn't need reassurance, but it reminded her she wasn't alone. The verdict came down a week later. Daniel Harrington was found guilty of financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. His assets were frozen, pending further investigation. His reputation, once untouchable, lay in tatters. Investors fled. His once glittering empire crumbled into ruin. Natalie watched the live coverage from her new office at the Tribune, headlines flashing across her screen. Harrington Group falls amid scandal. Natalie Harrington, the journalist who took down a Titan tumor. She took a sip of her coffee, leaning back in her chair, calm and unshaken. It felt surreal, yet deeply satisfying. Not because Daniel had fallen, but because she had risen from it stronger than she'd ever imagined. Her phone buzzed on the desk, jolting her out of her thoughts. Natalie glanced at the screen, an unknown number. She hesitated for a second, then answered, her voice steady. Natalie Harrington. On the other end, a voice she knew too well. "You won," Daniel said. His words were soaked in defeat, but beneath it was something else, something Natalie couldn't quite name. She stayed quiet for a moment, letting the silence sting before she answered. "No, Daniel, I didn't win. You finally lost." A long silence stretched between them, heavy with old ghosts. "You know," he continued quietly, "there was a time when I really did love you." Natalie swallowed against the knot forming in her throat, but her tone never wavered. "And there was a time I loved who I thought you were." With that, she ended the call, setting the phone down with a finality that felt like freedom. A few weeks later, Natalie sat in the same corner cafe where everything had begun, this time sipping tea across from Noah. The chaos of the past few months had settled into a quiet hum, her life no longer a battlefield, but a blank page. "So," Noah said, leaning back in his chair with a half-smirk, "what's next for Natalie Harrington?" She smiled, stirring her drink thoughtfully. "A new investigation, maybe. Or maybe I'll finally take that vacation I've been promising myself." Noah raised a teasing eyebrow. "Vacation? Natalie Harrington? Never." She laughed. An easy, genuine laugh she hadn't allowed herself in so long she almost forgot how it felt. "Hey, I deserve it." As they talked and planned, Natalie felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope for a future that was entirely hers, where she wasn't Daniel Harrington's wife, or a headline, or a scandal. She was Natalie Harrington, on her own terms, and she was just getting started. Epilogue. Months later, Natalie moved through the bustling halls of the Tribune with a new spark in her stride. She had reclaimed her story, her life, and her next big piece was already taking shape. But this time, it wasn't about exposing a cheating husband or toppling a crooked corporation. It was about reinvention. Because if Natalie Harrington had learned anything, it was that true power didn't come from wealth or status. It came from knowing your worth. And she was worth everything. So the story is over. Our wonderful friends, are you still here at this late hour? If you are, then I know deep down this story has touched your heart in some way, just like it did mine, while bringing Natalie's fight to life word by word. If you take anything away tonight, let it be this. You may lose people, money, status, even your reputation for a time. But if you stand your ground for the truth, you reclaim something priceless, your self-worth. Natalie reminds us that healing doesn't come from waiting for an apology or watching someone else crumble. It comes from daring to choose yourself over and over, even when the world is watching. As Maya Angelou once said, you may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. Natalie decided. She was humiliated, betrayed, ridiculed, but she refused to be reduced to her wounds. And so can we. Maybe you're sitting there right now with your own private battles, your heartbreak, your secrets, your invisible wars. Tonight, promise me you'll remember this. You are worth fighting for. The truth you stand for, the freedom you deserve, the future you want. None of it is too big for you to claim. If this story stirred even a tiny spark of courage inside you, please help keep this fire alive. Like this video, share it with someone who needs it tonight, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. There are so many more stories waiting, stories that remind you to choose yourself, stand your ground, and heal on your terms. Take a deep breath, straighten your back, and tell yourself what Natalie would say. I am not defined by what they did to me. I am defined by what I choose to become next. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I see you, I believe in you. Good night, and stay brave." A wealthy entrepreneur was ashamed of his wife and brought his mistress to a lavish soiree. But upon arrival, what he witnessed stunned him. Subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more gripping stories like this one, and hit like to keep watching. The deep rhythm of music echoed through the venue, an elegant composition blending class and extravagance. The clink of crystal flutes, the subtle laughter of the elite, and the warm golden shimmer of the chandeliers created the perfect backdrop of absolute indulgence. Every detail was flawless, curated to captivate. But in that instant, Nathan heard none of it. His gaze was locked on the platform where a gentle spotlight cast its glow on Sierra. She was laughing, surrounded by adoring stares, as though she were the sun of the evening. The mistress he proudly paraded like a prized gem. The sleek crimson gown hugged her figure, and the diamonds hanging from her ears caught the room's light, magnifying her allure. She knew she was desired, and it thrilled her. "Are you okay?" Sierra asked, gliding her hand up his sleeve. Nathan blinked slowly, shaking off the strange feeling. "Yes, of course," he muttered. But his voice was unsteady. He should have been thrilled. Everything surrounding him was a symbol of his ascent. The soiree was a declaration of power, a testament that he had arrived. The crowd was elite, prominent moguls, high-level investors, loyal supporters of his ventures. He was respected, and now he stood beside a woman who embodied prestige and seduction. So why did the unease persist? A dissonant feeling crept through his chest, like something misaligned, something wrong, a quiet tension that refused to leave. That's when it happened. The hall's grand entrance opened. At first, no one noticed. But to Nathan, the moment stretched. His eyes fixed on the doorway, and his body turned cold. She was there, Leah. The woman he had kept from public view for years. The wife who always unsettled him, not because of who she was, but because of what she reminded him of. A past he desperately wanted to bury. She didn't fit the life he had engineered. She was too modest, too grounded. Or so he'd told himself. But standing beneath the golden light of the venue, Nathan's stomach dropped. Leah didn't look like the shadow of the woman he'd abandoned. She was glowing. Her black and gold dress, understated yet elegant, moved with grace. Her hair cascaded gently, and her eyes gleamed with a self-assurance he'd never recognized before. But it wasn't just her appearance that struck him. It was the way she entered, alone, without pause or hesitation, as though she belonged among them. Gradually, the crowd noticed her. Whispers stirred among the guests. Some reacted with surprise, others with quiet intrigue. A few knit their brows, trying to recall where they'd seen her. Leah didn't smile. She didn't seek attention. She was simply present, and that alone pulled every gaze her way. Nathan felt a chill crawl down his spine. Why was she here? And how had she changed so drastically? Beside him, Sierra sensed the shift in mood. Her hand clutched his arm more tightly. "Who's that?" The question came heavy with something Nathan couldn't define. Jealousy? Fear? He didn't respond. His pulse thudded violently as he watched Leah cross the room, every stride brimming with a confidence he'd never imagined she possessed. He thought he knew this woman, or at least he once believed he did. But the Leah standing before him was not the diminished wife he had discarded. She wasn't the woman who tolerated being sidelined, who settled for passing glances while he strutted around with Sierra at gatherings like this. The woman before him radiated a strength he'd never encountered, and it unsettled him deeply. Leah stopped near the bar, her posture poised. Every eye in the room shifted to her, and a waiter hurried to serve her. She accepted the champagne with quiet grace, but unlike Sierra, she didn't strive to captivate. It was effortless, and perhaps that was what made it impossible to look away. "Nathan," Sierra pressed, her tone edged with suspicion. "Who is that woman?" He sniffed lightly, trying to mask the crack in his composure. "No one." But that was a lie, and it unraveled the moment Leah's gaze locked with his and she smiled. It wasn't a greeting, nor was it shy or polite. It was a smile that declared, "I know exactly who I am, and now so do you." Nathan felt a chill snake down his spine. She knew precisely what she was doing. The space seemed to shrink. The air turned thick. The elegant soundtrack of voices and instruments dulled to a low hum. Something was building, and Nathan could sense it. But what? And why now? What was Leah's purpose in appearing like this? Nathan turned to the nearest server and grabbed a glass of whiskey, swallowing it in one harsh gulp. He needed to steady himself. He needed to take control. But how? When it felt like he was on the edge of losing everything. His mind drifted to the day he decided to erase Leah from his public image. In the beginning, she had stood by him, faithfully. She went to formal dinners, smiled at stakeholders, supported every step of his career. But over time, Nathan began to believe she no longer belonged in the world he was creating. Leah was too unpolished. She didn't wear couture like Sierra. She didn't speak the polished language of high society. She talked about ideals and meaning when everyone else only cared for profits and power. It irritated him, and one day, he just stopped bringing her. He told himself it was necessary, that she represented the man he used to be, not the one he had become. But now, she was here. And she fit better than anyone. "She's coming this way," Sierra murmured beside him, her voice taut with unease. Nathan swallowed hard, and indeed, Leah began making her way across the ballroom. Guests moved aside for her as though her presence commanded it. Some of the most prominent figures in the city greeted her as if they already knew her. But how? Leah stopped right in front of him. The silence between them pressed down like a weight. Nathan opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. And then, cutting cleanly through the tension, came another voice. "Leah, what a surprise." Nathan turned. It was Graham Parker, a titan in the finance world, approaching with an expansive grin. Graham was a man Nathan had spent years trying to win over, always feeling just short of earning his full respect. Yet here he was, treating Leah as if they were longtime allies. "Graham," she replied smoothly, "didn't expect to run into you here." "I could say the same. You've made quite the impression lately. I've heard about the ventures you're spearheading. Impressive stuff." Nathan's brow furrowed. "What ventures?" "That's kind of you," Leah smiled. "There's still much to accomplish." "Well, you'll have to share more about it." "Will you join us?" Nathan felt his throat tighten. What did he mean, join us? Graham Parker, the very man who had never acknowledged him as an equal, was now asking Leah to sit at his table. Sierra, sensing Nathan's unease, squeezed his forearm. "What is happening?" she whispered. "Who is she? And how does she know Graham Parker?" Nathan had no answer. And before he could begin to find one, another man approached. He was tall, with a steady gaze that somehow managed to be both strong and gentle. His tailored suit and composed demeanor marked him as someone of importance. Leah turned toward him and smiled. "Ethan," she said softly. Nathan felt a cold wave rush through his chest. The man took Leah's hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was equal parts respectful and intimate. "I was hoping to find you," Ethan said, never breaking eye contact. "I was starting to think you wouldn't show." Leah laughed. "I wouldn't miss a night like this." Nathan felt his hand tremble around the glass he was holding. Who the hell was this man? And why did he speak to Leah as if they shared something deep? A thick pressure began to build behind Nathan's ribs, part rage, part grief. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was the unsettling realization that Leah had become someone who existed completely outside his orbit, and someone else had taken his place in it. The ground seemed to shift beneath Nathan's feet. Nothing added up. Leah, the woman he'd once kept in the shadows, was now the center of admiration. She was no longer invisible. Worse yet, she wasn't alone. Ethan rested a hand on the small of her back with aggravating ease, guiding her toward the table where Graham Parker stood. Leah walked with him, never once glancing back, not even for a second. That was when it hit Nathan. This was not the same woman he had taken for granted. Leah had changed. And the most painful part? She didn't need him anymore. What stung even more was the memory, so vivid now, of that night years ago, when Leah had asked him if she could attend one of his galas. She had been hopeful, dressed modestly but beautifully, her eyes searching his for validation. And he had looked at her for a beat too long, then muttered something about it being strictly business, and how it would be best if she stayed home. She had nodded, hiding her disappointment, and he hadn't given it another thought. Until now. Until this moment, watching her glow in a room full of people who truly saw her. That thought pierced deeper than he expected. It wasn't just that she was gone, it was that she had outgrown him. Nathan's mouth turned bitter. He had lost Leah, but now, more than ever, he wanted her back. only it might be far too late. Sierra's discomfort was impossible to miss. Ever since that mysterious woman entered the venue, Nathan had become a different person. His eyes hadn't left her. His face kept shifting, confusion, surprise, and something else. Something Sierra didn't want to name, but felt tightening around her like a noose. She had to ask, "Nathan, who is that woman?" Her voice came out sharper than expected. He paused, gripping the glass. He didn't want to say it aloud, but his hesitation spoke volumes. "Oh my God," Sierra whispered, narrowing her eyes. "She's your wife? Or ex-wife? I can't even tell anymore." Nathan shut his eyes for a moment. He didn't want to confirm it, because it would make everything real. "Ex-wife," he said finally, though it lacked conviction. Sierra folded her arms, eyes returning to Leah. Suddenly everything clicked. The tension, Nathan's stunned expression, the silence between them, most of all, the way he couldn't stop staring at her. Sierra clenched her jaw. "We're leaving," she said. Nathan blinked, forcing his gaze away from Leah. "I don't want to stay here anymore." "Let's go, Nathan." He hesitated. Part of him needed to stay. He wanted answers. He wanted to understand who Leah had become, what she had been doing. He found himself haunted by how little he'd known her. All those nights when she tried to talk, to share bits of herself, her goals, her thoughts. He had nodded distractedly, already focused on his next meeting or scrolling through his phone. Now, those neglected conversations felt like missed lifelines. But Sierra was already gathering her things, clearly annoyed. The murmurs in the room were growing. He couldn't risk a scene. With one last glance toward Leah, who was laughing now at something Ethan said, completely unaware of Nathan's stare, he relented. "Fine," he said, masking his resentment. They left in silence. Nathan couldn't sleep. The wall clock read 2:45 a.m., and he was still lying on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. Sierra was upstairs in the bedroom, likely pretending to sleep. After they got home, she'd noticed how absent he was and tried to talk, but it quickly became an interrogation, and he'd snapped. "That's enough, Sierra. I don't want to talk about this." "Of course you don't," she shot back, "because you're still thinking about her." He'd walked out, down to the couch. Now, alone in the dark, Nathan felt hollow, like something vital was missing. How had Leah transformed so completely? He couldn't stop replaying it. Her confidence, the way she held herself, her independence. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. And then there was Ethan. Nathan shut his eyes, recalling how the man had rested his hand on Leah's lower back. A subtle but loaded gesture. It screamed familiarity. And that was the moment Nathan truly felt replaced. Not just as a partner, but as a presence in her life. He felt something tighten in his chest. Leah was with someone else, and for the first time, Nathan realized she might actually be happy without him. The sun rose, but sleep never came. Still on the sofa, eyes bloodshot and mind racing, Nathan heard Sierra's footsteps descending the stairs. She stopped halfway into the room, eyeing him with open irritation. "You didn't sleep?" He dragged a hand across his face, drained. "I couldn't." Sierra crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "You were thinking about her, weren't you?" Nathan sighed in frustration. "Sierra, don't start." "Oh, it's not starting," she laughed bitterly. "I saw the way you looked at her, Nathan. You were hypnotized. You didn't even notice I was standing next to you." He stood from the couch, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm just trying to make sense of it." "Make sense of what?" she snapped. "How the woman you threw away managed to thrive without you? How she's more stunning, more self-assured, more magnetic than ever?" He froze, staring at Sierra with a hardened face. She stepped closer. "It stings, doesn't it? Seeing her rise while you're stuck?" Her words dug into places he didn't even know were raw. He wanted to deny it, to argue back, but deep down, every syllable rang true. It wasn't just about Leah's success. It was the reflection it cast on his own failures. "I don't want to talk about this." Sierra let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you don't, because if you do, you'll have to admit the truth, to yourself." Nathan glared at her, his voice sharp. "Sierra, that's enough." "Enough," she exploded. "I deserve the truth, Nathan. How do you really feel about her?" He opened his mouth to respond. But then, without thinking, without even realizing, he made the one mistake he couldn't take back. "Leah, The silence that followed was crushing. Sierra's eyes widened, her expression like someone slapped across the face. Nathan's heart skipped. He'd done it. He'd said Leah's name, not Sierra's. "What did you just say?" she asked, voice breaking. "Sierra, You called me Leah." The air between them turned suffocating. Sierra's stomach twisted. Tears welled, but she refused to let them fall. "I'm such a fool," she whispered, shaking her head. "Sierra, please, wait." But she was already grabbing her purse. "No, Nathan. I've waited long enough. I waited for you to reassure me. I waited for you to say she didn't matter. But now it's clear. You've never moved on, have you?" He tried to reach for her, but she pulled away. Sierra stormed out the front door, slamming it behind her. Nathan ran after her. "Sierra, just listen." But she was already in her car. He pounded on the window, frantic. "Let me explain." She started the engine. Before driving off, she cracked the window slightly. "I should have seen it sooner." And just like that, she was gone. Nathan stood there on the curb, watching the taillights fade, alone for the first time in years. And it terrified him. The cold dawn breeze brushed against his skin, but he remained still. His mind was spiraling, trying to make sense of it all. Sierra had left, and the worst part, he hadn't even stopped her. But it was never really about Sierra. It never had been. There was guilt, yes, but also a hollow certainty he couldn't shake. She had always been the stand-in, a way to silence the echo Leah had left behind. And now, even that silence was gone. He dragged his hands down his face, feeling the weight of everything bear down. Since the night of the event, he hadn't found a moment's peace. Leah's face kept appearing in his mind, uninvited, unrelenting. Who was the woman he'd seen that night? Because it wasn't the same Leah he once left behind. That version of her, quiet, agreeable, hidden, was gone. And that scared him. He walked back into the house and sank into the sofa. The silence in the apartment felt heavier than ever. Nathan had always craved control, clarity, influence, order. But now, he felt unmoored. He had to know. Picking up his phone, he typed Leah Whitman into the search bar, and what he found stole the breath from his lungs. Articles, profiles, features. Leah appeared on the covers of business journals, in pieces about leadership and innovation. There was even a video of her speaking at a major industry forum. Nathan clicked. Her face filled the screen, poised in a sleek suit, her hair styled in soft waves, holding the microphone with assurance he had never seen. The greatest mistake is believing someone else completes you. I used to believe that. I reshaped myself to belong in someone else's world. But then I realized I didn't have to fit in their puzzle. I could design my own. The room erupted in applause. Nathan felt a knot twist in his stomach. He had never imagined Leah was capable of such power. He had never seen her for who she truly was. To him, she had always been just Leah, the woman at his side, the wife he could hide while he took center stage. But what stood before him now was undeniable proof that she had never needed him. And maybe, just maybe, she was better off without him. His eyes caught a name in the article beneath the video: Whitman Digital Strategies. Nathan's pulse quickened. Leah hadn't just pieced her life back together. She had built something. And not just any company, but one of the most exciting rising firms in the industry. He knew that world. Leah hadn't merely entered the arena. She had become a major player, and he had never seen it coming. His mouth went dry. If he hadn't seen it himself, he wouldn't have believed it. A tight ache formed at the base of his throat, the kind that came not from surprise, but from shame. Shame that he had underestimated her. That he had never cared enough to ask what she dreamed of. Leah stood at the window of her corner office, looking out over the towering skyline of Manhattan. The reflection in the glass revealed a woman unrecognizable from who she once was. Her gaze was sharp, her stance unwavering. She had reached the top. The path had been brutal. After stepping out from Nathan's shadow, Leah had questioned her very identity. Who was she without him? What could she become without being the wife of a high-profile entrepreneur? For a long time, she was adrift. Directionless. But then, something shifted. She realized she'd always had one thing Nathan had failed to see: intellect. Leah had always loved branding, the nuances of connection, how companies spoke to people. For years she'd supported Nathan quietly, shaping ideas, offering insight, proposing strategies. He never gave her credit. Never noticed that behind many of his achievements was her mind. One day she chose to stop waiting for recognition. If Nathan couldn't value her, the world would. She began anew. She took all she had learned and founded Whitman Digital Strategies, an agency for brands looking for a second chance, just like she had been. And in a twist of irony, the very professionals who once dismissed her now sought her guidance. She had become the very image of success he once doubted she could ever embody, and the irony carved deeper than any insult he had ever received. The phone rang, breaking her thoughts. Leah Whitman. Good morning. The voice was familiar. Leah, it's me. Her body stiffened. Nathan. The silence that followed lingered. Leah hadn't anticipated that call, but maybe in some way it was inevitable. She gripped the phone, her voice composed. On the other end, Nathan hesitated. He hadn't rehearsed anything. He had just dialed, compelled by an instinct he couldn't explain. I know it's been a long time, he began, voice steady but subdued, but I needed to talk to you. Leah inhaled deeply. About what? There was a pause. He hadn't expected her tone, so detached, as though he were nothing more than a distant acquaintance, not the man she'd once built a life with. About us. Her laugh was quiet, tinged with irony. Nathan, there is no us anymore. Every syllable was a cut. He should have known he had abandoned her, forgotten her. Now she was someone else. Someone he didn't recognize. Still, part of him couldn't let it go. I know I've made mistakes, he said, clutching the phone tightly. But can't we? No. Leah didn't waver, just silence. Nathan had never faced a rejection so absolute. He was used to control, in business, in image, in women. But Leah was no longer someone to control. I just want to understand what happened to you, he said eventually. Leah exhaled slowly. What happened to me? I woke up, Nathan. That's it? The finality in her voice drained the last trace of hope from his chest. His heart pounded. He wanted to say more. He wanted to believe they could fix things, start again. But before he could speak, the call ended. Nathan held the phone, listening to the empty static. She had truly shut him out. And he couldn't accept it. Leah placed the phone back on her desk and closed her eyes for a brief moment. She never should have answered, not out of lingering feelings, but because he didn't deserve her time. He had been the one to cast her aside, like she was some burden to be discarded. And now, after seeing her at her peak, he wanted back in, but it was far too late. She picked up her coffee and walked to the window. The Manhattan skyline stretched before her, vast and commanding. This was her world now. No longer hidden, no longer waiting for acknowledgement, no longer tethered to anyone's shadow. Each success, each breath of independence was earned through pain she'd had to endure in silence. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the office door. You okay? Ethan's voice was gentle. She turned, meeting his steady gaze. Ethan was different. He had always given her room to breathe. He saw her as an equal, not someone to reshape. She smiled. Just a call from the past. Ethan raised an eyebrow, curious. Nathan? Leah nodded. He let out a slow breath, arms crossing. And what did he want? Honestly, I'm not even sure. He said something about wanting to talk about us, but there hasn't been an us in a long time. Ethan gave a knowing smile. He finally realized what he lost. Leah didn't respond, because deep down she knew Ethan was right. Nathan never believed she'd really walk away. Never thought she could rise without him. But now, seeing her at the top, he wanted to understand. He wanted answers that no longer mattered. There had been nights, dark, desperate nights, when Leah herself hadn't believed she'd ever feel whole again. But she'd clawed her way back, not for him, not for revenge, but because she finally believed she was worth it. Ethan stepped forward, taking her hand. Do you want to talk about it? She shook her head. No, it's over. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Then let's focus on now. Big meeting in 1 hour. Leah smiled. Let's do it. She walked beside him, leaving Nathan where he belonged, behind her. Nathan couldn't get her out of his head. He wanted to move on, to forget, but something inside refused. Leah had become a puzzle, and Nathan always hated puzzles he couldn't solve. So the next morning, he drove without direction, thoughts tangled from that call. That's when he passed the cafe near her office. His chest tightened. There she was, sitting by the window, coffee in hand, laughing with Ethan. Heat surged through his veins. What was he doing? Why was he here? He had no plan, but before he could second-guess it, he parked and stepped inside. Leah hadn't noticed him yet, but she would, any second now. The cafe bell chimed as Nathan entered. The scent of espresso and pastries hung in the air, but he felt none of it. His focus narrowed on the woman by the window. Leah. She was smiling easily, relaxed in a way he hadn't seen in years, free, at peace. Like leaving him had finally given her space to breathe. And then, as if she sensed it, she turned. Their eyes met. Her smile vanished. Stillness. No one moved. Ethan also looked up, his expression calm as he registered Nathan. But instead of reacting with hostility, jealousy, or even concern, he looked to Leah and asked gently, "Do you want me to stay?" She held Nathan's gaze for a long moment, then turned to Ethan and offered a soft smile. "It's fine." Ethan nodded, took his coffee, and stood. He placed a light kiss on her forehead and said, "I'll see you later." Then he passed Nathan without hesitation, without a single glance. That hit harder than anything Nathan had braced for. Ethan wasn't threatened, and that meant one thing. Leah no longer belonged to him. Nathan swallowed hard and approached. She sat still, composed, unshaken. He took the seat across from her, fumbling for words. "You don't look surprised," he said at last. She placed her cup down and interlaced her fingers. "I'm not someone who's easily surprised." Her voice was calm, but every syllable was precise, cutting. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, clearly rattled. "I needed to talk to you." Leah exhaled. "You already did. Over the phone. Not like this." She lifted an eyebrow, waiting. Nathan took a long breath. "I made a mistake, Leah." She said nothing. He continued. "I was a coward. You were always there for me, always supporting me, and I hid from you. I dismissed you. And only now that I see you like this, do I understand what I lost." She tilted her head slightly, examining every word. "Nathan, let me ask you something." Her voice was soft, but unwavering. "If, on the night of that event, I had shown up as the old Leah, the one who waited at home, stayed in the background, would you be sitting here now?" His silence answered for him. Leah gave a faint smile. "I don't blame you. Truly, I don't. You were always exactly who you were. I'm the one who's changed." Nathan felt a tightness in his chest. "I want a second chance," he murmured. Leah gave a quiet, almost amused laugh, shaking her head. "Second chance, Nathan? We both know this story is over." He closed his eyes, the weight of her words settling over him. It wasn't just the end of a relationship, it was the collapse of a delusion he'd built for years. That she'd always be there, just waiting, that he was somehow irreplaceable. "But what if I told you I love you?" Her smile wavered. For a second he had hope, but then Leah picked up her bag and stood. "If you really loved me, you would have loved me when I was still standing beside you." It hit like a blow to the gut. Leah looked at him with a tenderness that carried no doubt. "I hope you find what you're looking for, but it won't be with me." She stepped back, drew a steady breath, and said in a calm but final tone, "Go find Sierra while you still can, because I'm no longer an option." And then, without turning around, she walked out of the cafe. Nathan remained seated, unable to move. He had never felt such emptiness. Around him, life carried on. The barista called out names, the city buzzed beyond the glass. But inside, everything had stopped. He had truly lost her, this time, for good. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was recognition. That for the first time someone had seen through him completely and chosen to walk away. What now? In a panic, he picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Sierra's name appeared. He stared at the screen, debating. But what if Leah was right? What if Sierra was his last real chance? The one person who might still care. His thumb hovered over the call button. Sierra. She might be the only one who could stop him from slipping into complete isolation. But did she want to? Was there still a space in her life for him after everything? He raked a hand through his hair, the pressure in his chest mounting. Leah's scent still clung to the air, her voice, those final words echoing in his mind. "I'm no longer an option for you." The blow had landed, and this time there was no fixing it. She had moved on, with Ethan, with her business, with her future. He shut his eyes, choking back his frustration. Just days ago, Nathan believed he had everything, believed Leah would always be where he left her. But now it was all crumbling. His certainty, his pride, his place in her life, all dissolved. And for the first time he felt the weight of being replaceable. His fingers moved across the screen, and before he could change his mind, he hit call. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times. Each tone made the dread in his chest grow heavier. "What do you want, Nathan?" Sierra's voice was cool, distant. He inhaled sharply. "I need to see you." She let out a short, dry laugh. "Now you do? And where was that when I walked away?" Nathan shut his eyes, guilt pressing down. "Sierra, I made a mistake. Silence. He could hear her breathing on the other end, but couldn't guess her thoughts. Just realizing that now? He paused. I didn't know what I wanted. And now you do. The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Nathan felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say yes, that he understood. But did he? Or was he just afraid to be alone? Can we talk? His voice was lower than he intended, hesitant. Sierra didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was tired. I don't know if there's anything left to talk about, Nathan. Please. Another long pause. Then the sound of a sigh on the other end. Tomorrow at 8, at the restaurant where we first met. But don't expect anything from me. And with that, the line went dead. Nathan stared at his phone, a knot tightening in his gut. He wanted to believe there was still hope, to fix even a part of the damage. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure of anything. That night, sleep never came. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, retracing every mistake, every wrong turn, trying to find a way back. But maybe there was no way back. And tomorrow, he would find out the truth. The hours dragged. The night was endless and restless. Nathan tossed in bed over and over, unable to find peace. Every time he closed his eyes, Leah's face surfaced, the firm tone of her voice, the certainty with which she had told him he was no longer an option. It gnawed at him. But what could he do? She had moved on. He had to face that. Or at least try. It was a strange realization that he no longer had a place in her life. For years he believed his presence was essential, that even when he was gone, she still belonged to him in some way. But no. Leah was not his shadow, not his memory. She had rebuilt her own identity without him. And that hurt most. He forced his thoughts away from her. He needed to focus on something else. Sierra, the woman who might still give him a chance. But did he want her? Or was she just a placeholder for what Leah once was? That question haunted him. When morning came, he still had no answer. He got up, took a long shower, and chose something smart but simple. He didn't want to look like he was trying too hard, but he also didn't want to look like he'd given up. He arrived at the restaurant at exactly 8, the same place where he and Sierra had first met. Back then, she was someone who never settled for less. Now, after everything, he wasn't sure if he still had a place in her world. He sat by the window watching the city move. Minutes crawled. She was late. 5, 10, 15 minutes. Each second chipped away at his hope. Would she come? Or had he lost her too? Nathan clenched his jaw, fighting the sinking feeling in his chest. But deep down, he knew. This time, he might really be alone. His phone buzzed on the table, jolting him. He grabbed it, Sierra. Maybe it would say, I'm running late. But as he opened it, his heart sank. The message said something else entirely. Nathan, I'm not coming. I spent the night thinking and realized this isn't fair to either of us. You need more time to figure out what you truly want. I know you're lost right now, but I can't be the one to rescue you. That's something only you can do. I'm moving forward, and I hope someday you'll find your way. I'm sorry, Sierra. The words blurred. He read them again and again, wishing they would change. But they didn't. She wasn't coming. This was final. He let the phone fall to the table, the weight of reality crashing down. In just days, everything he thought he controlled had slipped through his fingers. Leah had moved on. Sierra wouldn't be second place. And now he was alone. His chest tightened with a mix of regret, frustration, and fear. For the first time in years, he didn't know who he was without someone next to him. He had spent his life building an image, money, success, parties, admiration. He always had what he wanted. Or so he thought. But now without Leah, without Sierra, with no one waiting at home, what was left? He leaned back, elbows on the table. A waiter approached. Can I get you something, sir? Nathan looked around. Couples talking, friends laughing, people living. No one cared that his world was collapsing. He shook his head. No, thank you. He paid for the untouched coffee and left the restaurant. Outside, the sharp New York wind bit his skin, but he didn't care. He walked, aimless, letting the city swallow him. For once, he didn't know where he was going. He just needed to think, needed to understand. How had he ended up here? When did he become the man no one wanted to stay with? His mind drifted to Leah. In the early years, she had been full of light, ambition, ideas, dreams. He admired her once, loved her energy. But then, as his own goals grew, he stopped seeing her. She became part of the backdrop. Someone he ignored. And now, watching her rise, he realized She was never small. He had made her feel that way. And Sierra? She appeared when Leah was already gone. At first it was exhilarating. Sierra was bold, passionate, demanding, but all she ever wanted was love, and he used her to feel alive. Now, neither of them was in his life. And he had to live with that. He walked for hours, the weight of his choices settling in. What mattered? The money, the image, the admiration, or something else he had always overlooked? He stopped at a park, watching a mother chase her young son through the grass, both laughing without a care. His chest tightened. When had he last enjoyed something that simple? He had always looked ahead, never at what was right in front of him. Maybe it was time to change. Maybe it was time to rebuild. Alone, he picked up his phone. For the first time, there was no one to call. Leah? No. Sierra? No. And then he did something he had never done. He dialed a number and waited. After a moment, a warm voice answered. Nathan? What a surprise. He exhaled deeply. Hi, Mom. Can we talk? There was a pause. Of course, sweetheart. Is everything okay? Nathan stared at the horizon, feeling something shift inside. I think it's finally going to be. He stood in the square, speaking with her for a long time. When they hung up, he kept walking. But this time, not to escape. This time, to find something no amount of wealth had ever given him. The Stoics taught that everything we value can be taken away, and that true peace comes from within. As Epictetus once said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Nathan's journey showed us that redemption doesn't always come through grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with a simple phone call to someone you've forgotten. Sometimes it begins the moment you sit in silence and admit to yourself, I was wrong. Maybe you see a bit of Nathan in yourself, or Leah, or even Sierra. Wherever you are on your path, know this. Healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means facing it, learning from it, and becoming someone better because of it. So if you're still with us, my amazing friends, thank you. Truly. If this story made you feel something, share it with someone who might need it. Hit like if it spoke to you, subscribe if you want more stories that don't just entertain, but speak to the heart. Because sometimes a fictional journey can bring us closer to the truth than we ever expected. Until next time, stay kind, stay present, and remember, growth often begins when the illusion ends.